Marcus had served the royal palace for 15 years. Every morning he walked the same stone corridors, checked the same heavy doors, and watched over the same royal family. His life was simple and predictable, just the way he liked it. The palace walls had seen many secrets, but Marcus never paid attention to whispered conversations or closed-door meetings. He was a guard, not a spy. The morning started like any other. Marcus put on his dark blue uniform, polished his silver badge, and walked to his post outside the king's private study. The sun was just coming up, painting the marble floors with golden light. He loved these quiet moments before the palace came alive with servants, advisors, and royal duties. As he stood at his post, Marcus heard voices coming from inside the study. This was normal. The king often had early morning meetings, but something about these voices made him pause. They sounded different, worried, scared. "Even the people must never know," came the king's voice through the thick wooden door. Marcus had heard the king speak many times, but never like this. The royal voice that usually commanded respect now trembled with fear. "But your majesty," another voice replied, "how long can we keep this hidden? The truth has a way of coming out." Marcus pressed his ear closer to the door. Though he knew he shouldn't, guards were supposed to protect, not listen. But curiosity got the better of him. "The royal bloodline depends on this secret," the king continued. "If anyone discovers what really happened 25 years ago, everything we've built will crumble. The crown, the kingdom, even our lives could be in danger." Marcus felt his heart beating faster. 25 years ago was when the current king had taken the throne. Everyone in the kingdom knew the story. The old king had died in battle, and his son had bravely stepped up to rule. It was a tale of honor and courage that every child learned in school. "The documents are safely hidden," said the other voice, which Marcus now recognized as Lord Chancellor Williams. "But what about the witnesses?" "There were people who saw what really happened that night. Most of them are gone," the king said quietly. "Old age, accidents, some moved far away, but there are still a few who remember. We need to be very careful." Marcus stepped back from the door, his mind spinning. What had really happened 25 years ago? What witnesses? What documents? The heroic story of the king's rise to power that everyone believed, was it all a lie? The conversation inside continued, but Marcus could no longer focus on the words. His world felt like it was turning upside down. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family with his life. He had believed in their goodness, their right to rule, their noble character. Now, dark questions filled his mind. As the morning went on, Marcus tried to act normal. He nodded to passing servants, checked doors, and walked his usual routes. But inside, he was struggling. Every time he looked at the king's portrait hanging in the great hall, he wondered what terrible secret lay hidden behind those painted eyes. During his lunch break, Marcus sat in the palace garden, trying to make sense of what he had heard. The royal family had always seemed so perfect, so worthy of respect. The king was known throughout the land as a just and fair ruler. The queen was beloved for her charity work. The young prince was being trained to be a good future king, but now Marcus realized that everything might be built on a lie. The question that haunted him was simple but terrible. If the king's right to rule was based on a false story, then was he even the real king at all? That afternoon, Marcus found himself watching the royal family differently. When the king passed by, Marcus looked for signs of guilt in his face. When the queen smiled at him, he wondered if she knew the secret too. Even looking at the young prince made Marcus feel sad. Did the boy know that his future crown might be built on lies? As evening approached, Marcus realized he was facing the biggest choice of his life. He could pretend he had never heard anything and continue his simple life as a royal guard. Nobody would ever know that he knew. He could keep collecting his pay, sleeping in his comfortable room, and living without worry. Or he could try to discover the truth. He could investigate what had really happened 25 years ago. He could find out if the royal family deserved to rule, or if they were living a massive lie. But this path was dangerous. If the king was willing to keep such a big secret, What would he do to someone who threatened to expose it? Marcus thought about his own life. He had no family, no wife or children to worry about. He had given his best years to serving the crown. If that service was based on lies, then what had his life meant? As night fell over the palace, Marcus made his decision. He couldn't live with not knowing the truth, even if it destroyed his comfortable life, even if it put him in danger. He had to find out what really happened 25 years ago. He began to form a plan. He knew every corner of the palace, every secret passage, every hidden room. He had access to areas that most people never saw. If there were documents or evidence hidden somewhere, he might be able to find them. But Marcus also knew he had to be incredibly careful. The king had mentioned that witnesses had died or disappeared. Marcus didn't want to become another mysterious accident. He would have to investigate slowly, quietly, without anyone suspecting what he was doing, as he prepared for bed that night. Marcus looked at his reflection in the small mirror in his room. The face looking back at him was the same face that had woken up that morning, but everything else had changed. He was no longer just a simple guard following orders. He was now a man on a mission to uncover a truth that could shake the very foundations of the kingdom. The next morning would bring new challenges, new dangers, and new discoveries. Marcus didn't know what he would find, but he knew there was no turning back. The secret he had overheard had already changed his life forever. The next few days were torture for Marcus. He went through his normal duties, but his mind was always elsewhere, thinking about the secret he had discovered. He watched every movement in the palace, looking for clues about what had really happened 25 years ago. Marcus decided to start his investigation by learning more about the palace's history. He visited the royal library during his free time, pretending to read for pleasure. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, was happy to help him find books about the kingdom's past. "I never knew you were interested in history." "Marcus," she said with a smile, as she pulled dusty books from high shelves. "I've always been curious about the palace," Marcus replied, trying to sound casual. "Living here all these years, I thought I should know more about its story." Mrs. Henderson brought him several books about the royal family and the kingdom's history. Marcus spent hours reading, but the official story was always the same. 25 years ago, the old king had died heroically in battle against invaders from the northern mountains. His son, the current king, had been just 20 years old when he took the crown and successfully defended the kingdom. But Marcus was looking for what wasn't in the books. He needed to find people who had been there, who had seen what really happened. The problem was, as the king had mentioned, most of those people were gone. After several days of reading, Marcus decided to take a different approach. He remembered that there were old storage rooms in the palace basement where documents and royal records were kept. Maybe he could find something there that wasn't in the official history books. Late one night, Marcus made his way down to the basement. He had the keys to most palace doors, including the storage rooms. The basement was dark and cold, filled with the musty smell of old paper and forgotten things. Using a small flashlight, Marcus searched through boxes of documents. Most were boring records, lists of palace expenses, servant schedules, repair receipts, but in one dusty corner, found something interesting. A box labeled Royal Correspondence -25 years ago, with trembling hands. Inside were letters, official documents, and reports from that crucial time in the kingdom's history. Most were routine, but one letter caught his attention. It was from a general named Robert Stone to the old king. Dated just 2 days before the king's supposed death in battle, the letter read, "Your Majesty, I must inform you that your son has been meeting secretly with our enemies. We have evidence that he has promised them information about our defenses in exchange for their support when he takes the throne. I fear treachery is afoot." Marcus read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking. If this was true, then the current king hadn't heroically defended the kingdom. He had betrayed it. But what had happened to General Stone? Marcus had never heard his name mentioned in any of the palace stories. The next morning, Marcus asked Mrs. Henderson about General Stone, trying to sound casual. "Oh, Robert Stone," she said sadly. "He was a good man. Died in a riding accident just a few weeks after the old king passed away. Very tragic." The new king was quite upset about losing such an experienced general. So soon after taking the throne, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. A riding accident just weeks after writing that letter. Was it really an accident, or had General Stone been silenced before he could expose the truth? Over the next few days, Marcus became obsessed with finding more evidence. He started paying attention to the oldest servants in the palace. Hoping one of them might remember something from 25 years ago, he struck up conversations with Thomas, the head gardener, who had worked at the palace for 30 years. Thomas, said one afternoon while the old man was tending the roses, "You must have seen a lot of changes in this place over the years." "Oh yes," Thomas replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I remember when the old king died. Terrible time that was. Everyone was so scared about what would happen to the kingdom. You were here when it happened." "Indeed I was." Strange thing, though. Thomas looked around to make sure no one else was listening. The old king's body never came back from that battle. They said the enemies had taken it, but I always wondered why they would do such a thing. Usually, they let you bury your dead with honor. This was new information. Marcus had always assumed the old king had been properly buried. If there was no body, how could anyone be sure he had really died in battle? "What do you mean, Thomas?" "Well," the old gardener said quietly, "there were rumors at the time. Some said the old king might still be alive somewhere. But of course, such talk was dangerous. The new king needed people to believe he was the rightful ruler." Marcus's heart raced. If the old king might still be alive, then everything was even more complicated than he had thought. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about General Stone's letter, the missing body, and Thomas's careful words. He was starting to see a pattern, but it was too terrible to believe. Had the current king actually betrayed his own father to take the throne? The next day, Marcus decided to take an even bigger risk. He needed to find out if there were any other documents hidden in the palace. He remembered that the king's private study had several filing cabinets that were always locked. Maybe that's where the real secrets were kept, during the king's afternoon meetings. When Marcus knew the study would be empty, he used his master key to enter the room. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure someone would hear it from the hallway. The filing cabinets were indeed locked. But Marcus had learned to pick simple locks during his younger days. It took him several minutes, but finally, one of the drawers opened. Inside, he found what he had been looking for and dreading at the same time. There was a folder marked "Succession Crisis. Confidential." Inside were documents that told a very different story from the official history. The old king hadn't died in battle. According to these papers, he had discovered his son's betrayal and planned to remove him from the line of succession. But before he could do so, the old king had suddenly become ill and died in his room. The royal doctor's report mentioned sudden stomach illness. But there was a handwritten note in the margin that made Marcus's blood run cold. Symptoms consistent with poison. Marcus realized he was holding evidence that the current king might have murdered his own father to steal the throne. The heroic story of defending the kingdom was just a cover-up. The real enemy hadn't been invaders from the north, it had been the king himself. As Marcus put the documents back exactly where he had found them, he knew his life had just become incredibly dangerous. He now possessed knowledge that could destroy the royal family and change the entire kingdom. But he also knew that people who discovered such secrets had a habit of dying in mysterious accidents. Walking back to his post, Marcus realized that everything he had believed in was a lie. The king he had sworn to protect was actually a murderer and a traitor. The royal family he had served faithfully was built on blood and deception. Now Marcus faced an even bigger question. What should he do with this terrible knowledge? Should he try to expose the truth and risk his life? Should he flee the kingdom and try to forget what he had learned? Or should he find a way to use this information to bring justice to the real victims of the king's crimes? As the sun set over the palace, Marcus knew that his simple life as a royal guard was over forever. He was now sitting on the most dangerous secret in the kingdom's history. Marcus barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the documents he had found, especially the doctor's note about possible poisoning. The man he had served loyally for 15 years was not just a fake king, he was potentially a murderer. who had killed his own father. The next morning brought a new challenge. The king seemed different somehow, as if he could sense that something had changed in the palace. During the morning briefing with the guards, his eyes lingered on Marcus longer than usual. "Marcus," the king said after dismissing the other guards, "you've been with us for 15 years, haven't you?" "Yes, your majesty," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Loyalty is such an important quality," the king continued, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "I've always valued guards who understand that some things are better left unspoken. Don't you agree?" Marcus felt a cold sweat on his forehead. Was the king warning him? Did he somehow know that Marcus had discovered his secret? "Of course, your majesty. A good guard sees nothing, hears nothing, and speaks nothing unless ordered to do so." The king smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Exactly. I'm glad we understand each other, Marcus." After the king left, Marcus realized he was in more danger than he had thought. The king was suspicious, and suspicious kings had ways of making problems disappear permanently. Marcus decided he needed help, but who could he trust? Everyone in the palace depended on the royal family for their jobs and homes. Most would never believe that their beloved king was capable of such terrible crimes. Even worse, some might report Marcus's suspicions directly to the king himself. During his lunch break, Marcus walked to the village that surrounded the palace. He needed to think clearly, away from the palace walls that seemed to be closing in on him. As he walked through the busy market square, he heard people talking about their king with respect and admiration. The king's tax policies have really helped our farming community, one merchant was saying to another. "Yes. And remember how he handled that drought 3 years ago? Sent food from the royal stores to every village that needed it." Marcus felt sick. These good people believed in their king. They trusted him to protect them and lead them wisely. If Marcus exposed the truth, it would destroy not just the royal family, but the faith of an entire kingdom. But then Marcus remembered General Stone, who had died in a riding accident after trying to expose the truth. How many other good people had died to protect the king's secret? How many more would die if the truth never came out? As Marcus walked back to the palace, he made a decision. He needed to find more evidence, something so clear and undeniable that no one could ignore it. And he needed to find someone brave enough to help him bring the truth to light. That evening, Marcus remembered something Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. There was an old priest named Father Michael who had served the royal family for over 40 years. He had been the palace chaplain during the time when the old king died. If anyone might remember what really happened, it would be him. Father Michael now lived in a small cottage near the village church. Retired but still respected by everyone who knew him. Marcus decided to visit him, but he would have to be very careful about how he approached such a dangerous topic. The next Sunday, Marcus attended the village church service. After most people had left, he approached Father Michael, who was putting away prayer books. Father Marcus said quietly, "I was wondering if you might have time to talk about the palace's history. I'm trying to understand more about the royal family I serve." The old priest looked at Marcus with sharp, intelligent eyes. Even in his 70s, Father Michael seemed to see straight through to people's souls. "Walk with me." "My son," he said, leading Marcus outside to a small garden behind the church. "What specifically interests you about the palace's history?" Marcus took a deep breath. This was his moment of truth. "Father, I've heard some troubling things about what happened 25 years ago when the current king took the throne. I'm struggling with questions about loyalty and truth." Father Michael was quiet for a long moment. Studying Marcus's face, finally, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, there are some stones that should not be turned over. Some truths that are too dangerous for ordinary men to handle. But Father, what if those truths involve terrible crimes? What if innocent people died because of lies?" The old priest sighed deeply. "I see that you already know more than you should. Tell me, what exactly have you discovered?" Marcus decided to trust the priest completely. He told him about overhearing the king's conversation, finding General Stone's letter, and discovering the documents about the old king's suspicious death. As Marcus spoke, he saw tears forming in Father Michael's eyes. When Marcus finished, Priest sat down heavily on a stone bench. "I have carried this burden for 25 years, Father Michael said quietly. "I was there the night the old king died. I gave him his last rites. What really happened, Father? The old king called me to his chambers late that night. He was in terrible pain, vomiting and barely conscious. But before he lost consciousness completely, he managed to whisper something to me." Marcus leaned closer. "What did he say?" "He said, 'My son has poisoned me. Don't let him destroy the kingdom.'" Those were his last words. The confirmation of his worst fears hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Did you tell anyone?" "I tried to tell the royal physician, but by morning, the old king was dead, and his son was already claiming the throne. The physician said the old king had died of natural causes, a sudden illness. When I tried to suggest otherwise, I was told that such accusations would be considered treason. So you said nothing?" "I was a coward," Father Michael said, tears now flowing freely down his wrinkled cheeks. "I told myself that maybe the old king was confused, maybe the illness had affected his mind. I wanted to believe it wasn't true. And as years passed, I convinced myself that the new king was ruling well. That maybe it was better to let sleeping dogs lie. But you never forgot. Never. It's haunted me every day for 25 years. I see the old king's face in my dreams, hear his final words. I failed him, Marcus. I failed God, and I failed the kingdom." Marcus felt the weight of the moment. Here was a witness, someone who had heard the old king's dying words. This was the evidence he needed, but it came with a terrible cost. The knowledge that good people had chosen silence over justice for 25 years. "Father, what should we do now?" The old priest looked at Marcus with renewed strength in his eyes. "We should do what I should have done 25 years ago. We should tell the truth, no matter the consequences. It will be dangerous. The king has already shown he's willing to kill to protect his secret. I'm an old man, Marcus. I've lived with this guilt long enough. If God gives me the courage to finally speak the truth, then perhaps my soul can find peace." As the sun set behind the church, 2 men sat in the garden, making plans that would change the kingdom forever. Marcus was no longer alone in his quest for justice. He had found an ally, someone who had witnessed the original crime and was finally ready to speak. But they both knew that their next steps would be the most dangerous of their lives. Kings who had killed once to keep their secrets would not hesitate to kill again. The question was no longer whether they should expose the truth. It was whether they would live long enough to do so. Marcus and Father Michael spent the next week carefully planning their next move. They knew they couldn't just announce their discoveries. The king would simply deny everything and arrange for both of them to have unfortunate accidents. They needed a way to protect themselves while revealing the truth to the kingdom. Father Michael suggested they should try to find other people who might remember details from 25 years ago. People who might be willing to speak the truth if they knew they weren't alone. There was a maid, Father Michael said during one of their secret meetings in the church garden. Her name was Sarah Collins. She worked in the royal chambers 25 years ago. She might have seen something the night the old king died. Marcus had heard the name before. Sarah Collins now worked as a cook in the palace kitchen, but she had been there much longer than most servants. She was a quiet woman who kept to herself and never gossiped with the other staff. Approaching Sarah would be risky. If she was loyal to the current king, she might report Marcus's questions immediately. But they needed more witnesses, and she was one of the few people still alive who had been close to the royal family during that crucial time. Marcus decided to start by observing Sarah's behavior around the king. During meal preparations, he noticed that she always seemed nervous when the king entered the kitchen. She would stop talking and keep her eyes down until he left. This wasn't unusual. Many servants were naturally nervous around royalty, but there was something different about Sarah's reaction. One evening, Marcus found Sarah alone in the kitchen, cleaning up after the evening meal. He approached her carefully. "Sarah," he said gently, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but you've been at the palace for a very long time, haven't you?" Sarah looked up, startled. "Yes, sir. Nearly 30 years now. You must have seen a lot of changes over the years." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she continued washing dishes. I keep my head down and do my work, sir. That's the safest way. The phrase safest way caught Marcus's attention. Why would a simple cook think in terms of safety? Sarah, I'm not trying to cause trouble for anyone, but I've been wondering about the time when the old king passed away. You were working in the royal chambers then, weren't you? Sarah dropped the dish she was holding. It shattered on the stone floor. She quickly bent to pick up the pieces. I don't remember much about those times, sir. It was all very confusing and sad. But Marcus noticed that her hands were shaking badly now. Sarah, if you ever saw something that troubled you, something that you felt you couldn't talk about, you should know that you're not alone. Sarah looked up at him with fear in her eyes. What do you mean, sir? Marcus made a quick decision. I mean that sometimes good people see things that powerful people don't want them to see. And sometimes those good people spend years feeling alone and scared, thinking they're the only ones who know the truth. Sarah stared at him for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, The old king didn't die naturally, did he? Marcus felt his heart racing. What makes you say that? I brought him his evening tea that night, like I always did. But this time, the young prince, the current king, he insisted on preparing the tea himself. Said he wanted to do something special for his father. I thought it was sweet at the time. Sarah's voice broke. But the old king was sick within an hour. Terribly sick. Did you tell anyone what you saw? I tried to tell the head butler, but he said I was imagining things. He said the stress of the old king's illness was making me see problems that weren't there. Then, a few days after the funeral, I was told I was being moved from the royal chambers to the kitchen. For my own good, they said. Marcus realized that Sarah had been a witness to the poisoning. Just like Father Michael had been a witness to the old king's final words. The truth was starting to come together. It was even more horrible than he had imagined. Sarah, there are other people who saw things that night. You weren't imagining anything, and you weren't alone. Tears started flowing down Sarah's face. I've lived with this guilt for 25 years. Every time I see the king, I think about that tea, about how I should have stopped him from preparing it himself. Maybe, if I had been braver, you were just doing your job. Sarah, you couldn't have known what he was planning. Over the next few days, Marcus, Father Michael, and Sarah began meeting secretly to plan their next steps. They had 3 witnesses now, Father Michael, who had heard the old king's dying words, Sarah, who had seen the poison tea being prepared, and Marcus, who had found the documentary evidence, but they still faced an enormous problem. How could they reveal this information without being killed before anyone believed them? Father Michael had an idea. There's someone else we should contact. Lord Commander Harrison of the Royal Army. He served under the old king and has always seemed troubled by the official story of what happened. Marcus knew Lord Commander Harrison by reputation. He was an honest man, a career soldier who valued honor above personal gain. But he was also completely loyal to the current king, or so it seemed. How can we approach him without putting ourselves in danger? Marcus asked. Leave that to me, Father Michael said. Harrison and I have known each other for many years. I can feel him out carefully, see if he might be willing to listen to what we've discovered. A few days later, Father Michael arranged to meet Lord Commander Harrison privately. The meeting took place in the church, where they could speak without fear of being overheard by palace spies. Marcus and Sarah waited nervously in the cottage. Behind the church, while the 2 older men talked, after what seemed like hours, Father Michael returned with Lord Commander Harrison. The military leader looked grim but determined. Father Michael has told me what you've discovered, he said to Marcus and Sarah. I want you to know that I've had my own suspicions for 25 years. What kind of suspicions? Marcus asked. The old king was planning to remove his son from the line of succession just days before he died. He had discovered evidence that the prince was selling military secrets to our enemies. The old king asked me to prepare documents that would officially name his younger brother as heir instead. What happened to those documents? They disappeared after the old king died. I was told they had never existed, that the old king's illness had made him confused and paranoid. But I knew what I had seen with my own eyes. Now they had 4 people who knew different pieces of the same terrible truth. The current king had not only murdered his father, but he had also betrayed the kingdom to its enemies. The heroic story of his rise to power was completely false, but Lord Commander Harrison brought both hope and a new level of danger to their group. If we're going to expose this truth, he said seriously, we need to be prepared for war. The king has loyal supporters, people who have benefited from his rule and won't want to believe he's a murderer. Some of them will fight to protect him, even if they know the truth. What are you suggesting? Father Michael asked. I'm suggesting that we need to be ready to protect ourselves and the evidence we've gathered. We also need to think about who should rule if the current king is removed from power. Marcus realized that their small group of truth-seekers just become the center of a potential revolution. They were no longer just trying to expose a crime, they were planning to overthrow a king and change the future of their entire kingdom. The weight of responsibility was enormous. But Marcus knew there was no turning back now. Too many people had died to protect this lie, and too many more would die if it continued. The truth had to come out, no matter what the cost. Lord Commander Harrison's words about potential war weren't just dramatic rhetoric. Over the following days, their small group realized they were dealing with a conspiracy that reached into every corner of the kingdom's power structure. The king's crimes weren't just personal, they threatened the very foundation of their society. Harrison had been doing his own quiet investigation since their meeting. He returned to the group with disturbing news. I've been carefully questioning some of my most trusted officers, he told them. During a secret meeting in Father Michael's cottage, 3 of them remember strange orders from 25 years ago. Orders that never made sense until now. What kind of orders? Marcus asked. The night the old king died, several loyal generals were suddenly sent to distant outposts on urgent missions. These were men who would have questioned the succession if they had been present. By the time they returned, the new king was firmly established on the throne. Sarah, who had been quiet during most of their meetings, suddenly spoke up. I remember something else from that time. The royal physician who examined the old king's body, Dr. Whitmore, he left the kingdom suddenly, just a few weeks later. Everyone said he got a better job in a foreign country, but I always thought it was strange. He loved working at the palace. Father Michael nodded grimly. Another inconvenient witness who had to be removed. The pattern is clear. Anyone who might have exposed the truth was either killed, threatened into silence, or forced to leave. Marcus felt the full weight of what they were uncovering. This wasn't just a single murder. It was a carefully planned coup that had eliminated or silenced dozens of people over the years. We'd think about timing, Harrison said. The kingdom's annual celebration is coming up in 2 weeks, the Festival of the Crown, celebrating 25 years of the current king's rule. There will be visitors from neighboring kingdoms, merchants from distant lands, and thousands of our own people gathered in the capital. You want to expose the truth during the festival? Marcus asked. Think about it, Harrison replied. If we try to reveal this information quietly, the king can simply deny everything and make us disappear. But if we present the evidence publicly, in front of thousands of witnesses, including foreign diplomats, he won't be able to cover it up. Father Michael looked troubled. But that could lead to chaos, even violence. Innocent people could be hurt. Innocent people are already being hurt, Sarah said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She rarely spoke during their planning sessions. I've watched this kingdom for 30 years. I've seen how the king deals with people who ask too many questions. Just last year, that young clerk in the treasury who discovered some financial irregularities, didn't he die in a house fire? Marcus remembered the incident. Thomas Mueller, a bright young man who had been investigating some unusual payments from the royal treasury. His house had burned down one night, and he had died in the fire. Everyone had called it a terrible accident. You think the king killed him too? Marcus asked. I think the king kills anyone who gets too close to his secrets, Sarah replied. We're not the first people to discover the truth, and we won't be the last. If we don't act now, more people will die. Harrison nodded. Sarah is right. We have a responsibility to act, not just for the old king's memory, for all the future victims if this continues. They spent the next several days working out the details of their plan. It was dangerous and complicated, but they all agreed it was their only chance to expose the truth safely. The plan required each of them to play a specific role. Father Michael would approach the visiting religious leaders who would be attending the festival, preparing them for the shocking revelations that were coming. If foreign priests and bishops heard the evidence, word would spread beyond the kingdom's borders no matter what the king tried to. Sarah would gather the other palace servants who might be willing to testify about strange events they had witnessed over the years. Many servants had seen things that didn't make sense at the time but would support their larger story. Harrison would carefully select military officers who could be trusted with the truth. Men who would help maintain order when the revelation caused chaos, and who could protect the group from the king's likely violent response. Marcus had perhaps the most dangerous job of all. He needed to gather the physical evidence from the palace, the documents, letters, and records that prove their case. This meant multiple trips to the king's private study and other secured areas, all while maintaining his normal duties and avoiding suspicion. As the festival approached, Marcus noticed that the king seemed increasingly paranoid. He had hired additional guards and was asking more questions about who had access to various parts of the palace. Several times Marcus caught the king watching him with suspicious eyes. One morning, the king called Marcus into his private study, the same room where Marcus had found the incriminating documents weeks earlier. "Marcus," the king said, settling into his chair behind the massive oak desk, "you've been an exceptional guard for many years. Loyal, trustworthy, discreet. Thank you, Your Majesty. Loyalty is such a precious quality, don't you think? Especially in times when there are so many uncertainties in the world." Marcus felt sweat forming on his forehead but kept his voice steady. "I've always believed that loyalty is the most important quality a guard can have." "Exactly," the king leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "Which is why I'm sure you would tell me immediately if you ever heard rumors or gossip that might be harmful to the royal family." This was definitely a test. The king suspected something, but Marcus wasn't sure how much he knew. "Of course, Your Majesty. Though I must say I rarely hear gossip. Most people are too busy with their work to spend time on rumors." The king was quiet for a moment. "What about old stories, Marcus? Stories about the past that some people might want to revisit." Marcus's heart was pounding, but he forced himself to look confused. "I'm not sure what you mean, Your Majesty. I mean stories about how I came to the throne, about my father's death, about those difficult early days of my reign. Some people have very active imaginations, you know. They like to create dramatic tales about events they don't fully understand." "I see." Marcus paused, as if thinking. "I suppose people do sometimes wonder about historical events, but I've always found that the official records are usually the most reliable source of information." The king smiled, but it was a cold expression. "Yes, official records. They're so much more trustworthy than gossip and speculation, aren't they?" "Absolutely, Your Majesty." "Good. I'm glad we understand each other." The king stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "Oh, and Marcus, I think it might be wise for you to avoid spending so much time with some of the older palace staff. People like Mrs. Henderson in the library, or that cook, what's her name? Sarah Collins. Sometimes older employees develop fanciful ideas about the past." Marcus felt his blood turn cold. The king knew about his conversations with Mrs. Henderson, and he was specifically mentioning Sarah by name. "Their group was in immediate danger, of course, Your Majesty. I'll be more careful about where I spend my free time." "Excellent. I knew I could count on your good judgment." As Marcus left the study, he realized that their timeline had just accelerated dramatically. The king was closing in on their investigation, and they might not have until the festival to act. They needed to implement their plan immediately, even if it meant taking greater risks. That evening, Marcus met with the others in Father Michael's cottage. When he told them about his conversation with the king, Harrison's face grew grim. "He knows," the commander said simply. "Maybe not all the details, but he knows something is happening." "We have to move now, but we're not ready," Father Michael protested. "We haven't contacted all the people we plan to reach." "We'll have to work with what we have," Sarah said. "If we wait any longer, we'll all end up having mysterious accidents." "Marcus, Realized that their careful planning was about to give way to desperate action. Tomorrow was the beginning of the Festival of the Crown, and ready or not, they were going to expose the truth that had been hidden for 25 years. "There's something else," Marcus said. The king mentioned Mrs. Henderson specifically. "I think we should warn her that she might be in danger." Harrison nodded. "We should warn everyone who might be at risk. This is about to become very dangerous for a lot of people." As they finalized their plans for the next day, Marcus looked around at his unlikely allies. A priest carrying 25 years of guilt, a cook who had witnessed a poisoning, and a military commander who had lost faith in his king. Together, they were about to attempt something that could either save their kingdom or destroy it completely. The Festival of the Crown would indeed be memorable, but not in the way anyone expected. By tomorrow night, either the truth would finally be revealed, or they would all be dead. Marcus spent his last night as a simple royal guard staring out his window at the palace gardens, knowing that by the next evening, everything would be different. The weight of centuries of royal tradition was about to come crashing down. And he was the man who had set it all in motion by simply listening at the wrong door on the wrong morning. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning that was 25 years overdue. The Festival of the Crown dawned bright and clear, with thousands of people flooding into the capital city to celebrate 25 years of the king's rule. Colorful banners hung from every building, musicians played in the streets, and merchants sold commemorative items to excited visitors. Nobody knew that this day would mark the end of everything they believed about their beloved king. Marcus woke before sunrise, his stomach churning with nervousness. Today he would either help expose the greatest crime in the kingdom's history, or he would die trying. There was no middle ground left. He put on his royal guard uniform for what might be the last time, and made his way to the palace's central courtyard, where the main celebration would take place. The king would give a speech at noon, thanking the people for their loyalty and reflecting on his 25 years of rule. That speech would become the moment of truth. As Marcus took his position near the speaker's platform, he could see the other members of their group moving into place. Father Michael was standing with a group of visiting religious leaders near the front of the crowd. Sarah had positioned herself where the palace servants typically watched royal events. Harrison was with his officers, ostensibly providing security for the event. The morning passed slowly as crowds gathered and entertainment filled the hours before the king's speech. Marcus watched the royal family taking their places on the decorated platform. The king looked confident and relaxed, waving to the cheering crowd. The queen smiled graciously at everyone around her. The young prince, now 25 years old himself, looked proud to be part of such a grand celebration. Marcus felt a pang of sadness looking at the prince. The young man had grown up believing his father was a hero, never knowing that the crown he would someday inherit was built on murder and betrayal. Today would destroy the prince's world as completely as it would destroy the king's reign. As noon approached, Marcus could feel the tension building among their small group. They had hidden copies of the incriminating documents in multiple locations around the courtyard. Harrison had positioned trusted officers at strategic points. Father Michael had briefed several foreign priests about what they were about to witness. Everything depended on timing and courage. At exactly 12 o'clock, the king stepped forward to address the crowd. The thousands of people gathered in the courtyard fell silent, eager to hear from their ruler on this special anniversary. "My dear subjects," the king began, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. 25 years ago, I stood before you as a young man, thrust into leadership by tragic circumstances. My father, your beloved king, had given his life defending our kingdom against those who would destroy us. Marcus exchanged glances with Harrison. The king was beginning with the same lie they had all believed for so many years. Today, I want to reflect on the lessons those early days taught me about duty, sacrifice, and the terrible cost of leadership. The king continued his speech, painting himself as a reluctant hero who had risen to meet his kingdom's greatest challenges. The crowd listened with rapt attention, hanging on every word from the man they trusted completely. Marcus knew they had to wait for the right moment. If they interrupted too early, before the king had fully committed to his false version of history, He might be able to recover and dismiss their accusations as the ravings of traitors. The enemies who killed my father, the king continued, tried to use treachery and deception to weaken our defenses, but loyalty and truth prevailed over their lies and schemes. That was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. The king had just spoken the words loyalty and truth while telling the biggest lie in the kingdom's history. Marcus stepped forward from his position and shouted in a voice that carried across the entire courtyard. Your Majesty speaks of loyalty and truth. But what about the truth of how your father really died? A shocked silence fell over the crowd. The king's face went pale, then flushed red with anger. Guard! The king shouted. Arrest that man for treason? But Harrison's carefully selected officers remained motionless. They had been briefed about what was coming and were prepared to let the truth be heard. I am Marcus Thompson. Marcus continued, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I have served this palace faithfully for 15 years. What I am about to tell you will shock you. But every word is the truth. The crowd was murmuring nervously, unsure what was happening. The king was gesturing frantically to his guards, but none of them moved to stop Marcus. 25 years ago, Marcus said loudly, the old king did not die in battle. He was murdered in his own bed by the man who now wears his crown. Gasps and shouts of disbelief erupted from the crowd. The king was screaming orders that nobody followed, his composure completely shattered. Father Michael stepped forward from his position near the religious leaders. I was there that night, he called out in his strong priest's voice. I gave the old king his last rites. With his dying breath, he told me that his son had poisoned him. Now Sarah emerged from the crowd of palace servants. I prepared the old king's evening tea that night, she said, her voice shaking but determined. But the prince insisted on adding something special to it himself. Within an hour, the old king was dying in agony. The crowd was in chaos now. Some people shouting accusations, others defending their king, most simply trying to understand what they were hearing. Lord Commander Harrison stepped onto the platform, his military bearing commanding immediate attention. Citizens of our kingdom, he said in his officer's voice, I have served the crown for 30 years. I have evidence that the current king not only murdered his father, but also betrayed military secrets to our enemies in exchange for their support in claiming the throne. The king finally found his voice again. Lies, he screamed. All lies. These are traitors trying to destroy your rightful king. But Marcus was ready for this response. He held up a folder of documents. These papers, found in the king's own files, tell the true story. Medical records suggesting poison. Letters from generals who tried to expose the treason. Orders that sent loyal officers away on the night of the murder. Harrison's officers moved forward to protect Marcus as he began reading from the documents. The crowd was pressing closer, eager to hear every word of the evidence that was destroying everything they thought they knew. As the truth unfolded, the initial disbelief was giving way to anger as people realized how completely they had been deceived. The king they had loved and trusted for 25 years was not just a fraud, he was a murderer who had built his reign on the blood of his own father, the young prince. Standing frozen on the platform, suddenly spoke for the first time. Father, he said in a voice full of pain and confusion, tell them it's not true. Tell them you didn't kill grandfather. The king looked at his son. For a moment, Marcus saw something break in the man's eyes. The weight of 25 years of lies seemed to crash down on him all at once. Double quotes, the king started, then stopped. He looked out at the thousands of faces staring at him with growing hatred and disgust. I did what I had to do, he finally said, his voice barely audible. The old king was weak. He would have destroyed the kingdom with his foolish idealism. I saved us all. It was a confession. After 25 years of lies, the truth was finally spoken by the killer himself. The crowd erupted in fury. People who had celebrated this man just moments before were now calling for his arrest, his punishment, his death. The festival of the crown had become the day the crown fell. Harrison's. Officers moved quickly to secure the royal family and maintain order as the crowd's anger threatened to turn into a riot. The king would face justice, but it would be proper justice. It's not mob vengeance. As Marcus watched the events unfold around him, he felt an overwhelming mixture of relief, sadness, and exhaustion. The truth was finally out, but the cost had been enormous. A kingdom's faith in its leaders was shattered. A young prince had learned that his father was a monster. Decades of carefully maintained order were crumbling, but Marcus also knew that this had been necessary. General Stone, Dr. Whitmore, Thomas Mueller, and countless others had died to protect this lie. Their deaths finally had meaning now that the truth was exposed. The Festival of the Crown would be remembered forever. It would be remembered as the day a simple guard's curiosity and conscience brought down centuries of royal tradition, and proved that even kings must answer for their crimes. As the sun set over a kingdom forever changed, Marcus realized that his quiet life as a palace guard was over. But in its place, he had something far more valuable: the knowledge that he had chosen truth over comfort, justice over safety, and courage over silence. The secret that had started with whispered words behind a closed door had finally destroyed the man who thought he could murder his way to a crown and live with the lie forever.